By the time Ross cleared his throat behind me, I already hated Vesper a little. On the main display, the planet filled half the screen. Blue-white clouds, bronze continents, a bright swath of ocean. Nothing wrong with it. That was the problem. Finley, final medical clearance. Ross hovered at my shoulder, boots hooked into the deck restraint, one hand on the back of my chair. The mission commander always looked like he was bracing for a punch, even during routine checklists. Vitals for the landing party are green, I told him. No one is going to drop dead on touchdown. I did not add, not from anything I can see. The transport shuddered as the descent thrusters kicked harder. A low vibration ran through the chair into my spine. Outside, Vesper's upper atmosphere stripped heat from the hull. The color balance on the forward feed shifted from white haze to brown cloud. Atmospheric mix, perfect with intolerance, if anything too clean. Trace gases within human comfort range. No free toxins. Soil readings from the probe, rich in organics, almost no heavy metals, no background spores, no microbial signatures of any kind. Too easy, I murmured. Ross heard that. What is? Everything. I pulled up the microbiology panel again as if a whole biosphere might appear in the margins if I glared hard enough. We are about to walk onto a planet with water, oxygen, carbon, and no native life. Nothing microscopic in the air, nothing in the soil, no weird proteins, no rogue enzymes, just blanks. That is why we are here, Ross reminded me. You sign off that the blanks are real. I sign off that we can build on them. Corporate gets its new garden. Everyone gets paid. He sounded relaxed. He was not. I could hear the tension in the way he clipped each phrase like he was swallowing other sentences. I am signing off that no current test shows danger, I countered. That is all I can give you. Ross squeezed my shoulder once and pushed off toward the cockpit. I will take that to mean you are done arguing with gravity. Strap in, Doctor. The ship dropped, steadied, dropped again. Miguel's voice came through the cabin intercom from the pilot seat. Touchdown in 30, he said. Try not to puke in your visor, gentlemen. That would be a rough first impression. I tightened my harness and glanced across the small cabin. Tariq met my eyes and raised his brows over his mask. A silent, "Are we okay?" I gave him the smallest nod I could manage. Tariq knew me well enough to read the gap between that nod and the truth. We broke through the last shelf of cloud. The forward feed showed a desert of low, rolling hills covered in bronze dust and pale stone, with a river cutting a dark line across the middle distance. The landing site sat on a flat patch near the riverbank, where the probe had already dropped a marker beacon and a small equipment pallet. Miguel eased the ship down, thrusters kicking up sheets of dust. The hull trembled, then settled. The vibration faded to a low tremor through the metal. Contact, Miguel called. Welcome to Vesper. Try not to break it. Harness buckles snapped free in staggered pops. I unhooked and floated for half a second, then pushed off toward the locker wall. Helmets, surface suits, standard field packs, everything laid out in familiar order, as comforting as ritual can be. I pulled my suit on, checking seams and seals, running fingers along joints that could kill you if they failed. When I reached for my helmet, my hand paused. Problem? Ross had his helmet half on, chin strap loose, his dark hair plastered down from the flight. We do not know why this air is so clean, I said. If there is any kind of reactive agent out there, filters will pick it up faster than bare mucous membranes. We have done the scans. The probe breathed this air for weeks with a whole lab strapped to its back, and nothing grew in the dishes. He clicked his helmet down. The faceplate polarized for a moment, then cleared. We will be cautious. We will also not suffocate ourselves just because nature finally handed us something easy. I did not argue. I sealed my own helmet, checked everyone's indicators, and triggered the suit diagnostic. Green across the board. We cycled through the airlock. The inner door went first. A soft rush of equalizing pressure brushed my ears. The outer door lifted, letting light spear in. No hiss, no dramatic fog, just the quiet opening of metal onto a world that had never heard a human voice. Vesper's daylight flooded the chamber, thin, pale, slightly muted by dust. The river lay off to the left, a flat strip of dark glass. The hills beyond looked low enough to walk in a day, their slopes smoothed by ages of wind. My boots touched Vesper's soil. It gave less than I expected, more compact than desert sand, more like very fine grit pressed into place. The ground carried a faint tremor from the thrusters as they wound down, then settled into stillness. "Ross," Tariq breathed over the suit channel. "This is... Look at it. It is waiting for us. That is the job." Ross stepped ahead purely for the symbolism of being first. "Welcome to Vesper surface operations. Helmets stay on for now while we plant the habitat. Once we have internal readings and a clean cycle, we will talk about tasting the local air." That was a compromise. I took it. The first few hours were all motion and equipment. We walked supplies from the pallet to the clearing, locked down the modular habitat base, and watched Miguel swear at a stubborn support strut until it locked at the right angle. I did routine checks, heart rate, oxygen saturation, skin temp, quick ultrasound sweeps when someone complained about a twinge. No one had anything more serious than sore muscles and the usual cramped feeling after too long strapped into landing couches. Vesper stayed quiet. The soil core samples we took around the site all looked the same. Fine bronze grains, a scattering of small pale stones, consistent levels of carbon compounds at every depth. When we crushed a stone, its interior matched the outside. No veins, no inclusions. As if a child had sketched rock, and the planet had followed instructions exactly and no further. Near the ship, a line of larger boulders marked the edge of an old dry channel. Their surfaces were etched with thin, parallel grooves, each about as wide as a fingernail, running in straight bands from top to bottom, not worn curves. More like something had laid combs along them and pressed down, again and again. I brushed gloved fingers along one of the grooves. The stone felt slightly warmer than the air, as if it held some memory of the thruster's heat. I logged a quick note on my wrist unit for later. Grooves, unnatural, not wind. Check under micro. Quit romancing the rocks, Doctor. Miguel lugged a crate past me toward the habitat. We need you on filter duty before those air units clog with dust. Keep dreaming. I am not doing your maintenance. He grinned through his visor and kept walking. By the time the habitat inflated and the frame locked into place, the sun had tilted toward late afternoon. Ross authorized the first interior entry. We cycled through the airlock, dumped suits and helmets, and stood in our new box of home. The habitat walls were a pale, synthetic fiber stretched over ribs, anchored deep into the compacted soil. Floor plates clamped together under our boots. Overhead, the air unit purred as it pulled in outside gas through filters and released it into the room. Everyone peeled sweat-damp undersuits from their shoulders and eased muscles that had not loved the descent. A faint baked dust taste clung to the air, even after filtration. Not unpleasant, just present. "Atmospheric monitors," Ross called. "Stable," I answered, eyes on the handheld. "Oxygen where we want it, no carbon spikes, no particulates over baseline." He looked around our small, common space. Folding table, pinned-down chairs, 2 workstations, 1 medrack in the corner. The walls shivered slightly with each gust of outside wind. "We are not on a station in deep orbit anymore," Ross told us. "This is a planet that will feed our grandchildren. Time to treat it like one. Helmets off are authorized inside the habitat." He unclipped his mask, then his collar ring. For a moment, the only sound was the fan and the quiet tap of someone shifting their weight. Ross pulled his helmet free. Dark hair sprang damply up. He took his first unfiltered breath of Vesper and held it, eyes closed, like a man tasting the first sip of a long-promised drink. "If anyone drops, I will make a note," I muttered. Tariq laughed and popped his own seals. Miguel followed. One by one, The other men slid out of their gear until I was the only one still half-suited. They were all watching me now. Not with open pressure. Just the kind of attention that says, if you hold us back, you had better have a reason stronger than a hunch. I unlatched my own helmet. The collar ring clicked loose. Cool air brushed sweaty skin at my throat. I lifted the helmet, set it on the floor, and inhaled Vesper. Dry. Thin. A little lighter than a sea-level breath on Earth. There was a taste of dust and something else under it, like stone that had never known moss or lichen. Blank. My chest tightened anyway, purely from nerves. "Happy?" Ross asked. "Ask me in a week." He clapped me on the shoulder and moved off to his workstation. We worked through the rest of the day in the usual landing haze. Tariq ran his first full series of soil mixes at the bench, checking how Vesper dirt took water and fertilizer. Miguel pulled apart an air filter to check for early clogging. Ross drafted the first report to corporate. I set up the med bay in one corner, compact bed, diagnostic unit, tiny lab stack. Then I did what I always do on first day surface. I checked everyone. Quick scans, quick blood draws, quick questions. Any dizziness, any tingling, any unusual tastes or sensations. The routine took less than an hour. I stored baselines for comparison. By nightfall, exhaustion hit all at once. We ate, traded a few half-hearted jokes and fell into our bunks. Vesper's wind moved outside, rasping over the habitat's skin in long strokes. It sounded less like weather and more like breath. I did not sleep well. The cough started on the second day. We had split into pairs to run environment sweeps. Ross and Miguel took the river and a stretch of the far bank. I stayed near the habitat with Tariq, pulling soil cores at set distances. He was on his third sample when he coughed once. Then again, a dry bark that bent him slightly at the waist. "Fine," he waved me off when I looked over. "Too much dust in the helmet yesterday, that is all. Humour me." I slung my kit bag down next to him. "If you die on my watch, I get paperwork." He rolled his eyes but let me pop open the portable scope and fit the contact pad against his ribs. The handheld imager gave me a grey outline of lung fields, heart shadow, bone. Everything looked normal at first pass. I upped the resolution, tracing the delicate foam of air sacs and capillaries. There, along the lower edge of the right lung, in the region physicians always worry about, a faint cluster of rounded pockets that did not quite match the usual texture. A little too smooth, a little too regular, like glass beads tucked into foam. "Tariq," I murmured, "have you ever had pneumonia? Scarring?" "Once as a kid. Hospital, oxygen, the whole performance." He hesitated. "Is there a mark?" "Possibly. A small one." I saved the image. The unit's tiny processor overlaid a comparison against baseline from orbit. The new pockets were not there before. I logged it as anomaly monitor because I did not have anything better to call it. He coughed again that evening during dinner. Miguel started complaining about grit on his skin when he sweated. "Feels like beach sand," he muttered, rubbing at the inside of his elbow. When he lifted his arm, small crystals clung to the hair. They caught the light like grains of salt. "You always this dramatic about your personal hygiene?" Ross asked. "Come closer. I will share." I scraped a few grains into a sample tube. Under the bench scope, they looked like tiny, dry seeds, oval, faintly ridged, a little more organic than salt should be. I tapped one with the tip of a sterile probe. It cracked. The inside showed a different texture from the shell, but the magnification on this little toy would not tell me more. I ran a quick field test. Half the grains went into a slide with distilled water. The rest went onto a pinch of Vesper soil in a dish. The water set did nothing. The grains sank, sat, and stayed as what they were. The soil set changed. At first nothing, then a slight swell along the ridged sides. The shell split in a slow, clean line. Something inside pushed up, pale and soft as new fingernails. Under the scope, hair-thin filaments unfurled and sank into the surrounding dirt. "Okay." I whispered. I collected myself and walked to the common table with the empty tube. Everyone listen, I told them. From now on, anything that comes off your body goes into containment. Sweat crystals, skin flakes, hair, nail clippings, anything. If you cough, I want it in a dish. If you sneeze, I want it in a dish. If you bleed, we do not wipe it on our pants and move on. We collect it, and I see it. Miguel lifted his brows. Romantic. This is not a joke. We have interaction between human excretions and Vesper soil that we did not see in pre-landing tests. Ross rubbed the bridge of his nose. Define interaction. Something in Miguel's sweat hardened into grains. Those grains opened in contact with Vesper soil and sent fibers into it. Nothing happened in water. I am not guessing about that. He leaned back, chair creaking. You think the planet is reacting to us? I think something out there recognizes us as more than tourists. Silence settled across the table. It was not comfortable, but it held. Fine, Ross decided. We add Finley's morbid souvenir collection to protocol. No one panics, no one slacks. We keep logging data. We keep working. He moved on to the next item. Supply checks, survey paths for the morning. I let the planning fade into the background while I watched Tariq, who had his hand pressed lightly to his chest. He caught me looking and forced a crooked smile. If something grows out of me, you are responsible for naming it. Absolutely not. The next morning, the wind came up early. Dust rose in curtains, blurring the edges of hills and ship. The sky went from clear to a pale, uniform smear. Sensors kept insisting everything was fine. We split again. This time Ross took the far ridge with two of the others. Miguel stayed at the habitat, working on exterior anchor points for a second module. I walked out with Tariq, following a line of flagged stakes that marked a radial transect from camp to the river. The ground underfoot felt slightly more packed than on the first day, like thousands of tiny pieces had settled under our boots. You know what bothers me? Tariq asked, stepping over a low rock. That you have not yet named a soil type after yourself. The soil is too consistent. Every sample I pull looks like the last one. Same grain size, same mix, same response to water. That is not how planets work. You get zones, layers, pockets. It is like someone laid down a single recipe and walked away. He coughed once, shook it off. We kept walking. By the time we reached the river, a fine film of dust coated our boots and lower legs. Vesper's water moved slowly, more like thick glass shifting in a long, patient wave than a busy current. I took readings while Tariq knelt at the bank and filled sample flasks. Do you ever think about how many worlds we might ruin by accident? He asked, still facing the water. That is a cheerful topic. I mean it. We bring seeds, microbes, stray spores everywhere we go. Little stories living in our guts. We step down, and the local story gets smothered. But here there is no local story. He straightened, wiped his glove on his thigh. You would think that would feel like a relief. It does not. He opened his mouth to answer. The cough hit him mid-sentence, not the dry little bark from before. This one ripped up from somewhere deep, folding him in half, sample flask flying. He braced his hands on his knees, helmet tilted toward the ground, body shuddering with each convulsion. Sound tore through the suit channel, rough and wet. Tariq, I grabbed his shoulder. Try to inhale slowly. Do not fight it. Useless advice, but doctors still say it even when we know better. Another violent cough racked him. Something dark spattered onto the dust between his boots. For one brittle second, I thought it was blood. Then I saw the shapes. They were not drops. They were small bags, each about the size of a pea, clustered together in a wet heap. Their outer skin looked translucent and faintly pearly, like fish eggs that had been dried out, then moistened again. Tariq wheezed and straightened, hand pressing against his chest. I am fine, he rasped. Just something caught. I guided him a step back. Hold still." Through the visor, his face looked grey and strained, but his oxygen readout stayed in the green. Pulse up, but not dangerous. For the moment. I crouched over the heap between his boots. The bags shifted almost imperceptibly, not from internal motion, but from settling. A few had already rolled off the top of the pile and come to rest directly on bare ground where our boots had scuffed the dust aside. Where they touched Vesper soil, their skins began to crease. "Tariq, did you have anything in your throat when we left the habitat? Food? Fluid?" "No." As we watched, the first bag cracked. A thin line opened along one side. Pale matter bulged out, then pushed free, unfurling in the open air. A hair-thin stalk extended upward, glistening, then split into two flared leaves. Within moments, faint green threaded through them, colour deepening as if drawn up from the ground. Another bag cracked. Another stalk rose. The pile of coughed-up mass turned into a tiny cluster of plants, each no higher than my thumb. I felt a tick in my jaw, the old warning pulse of tension that meant my body understood something before my mind did. This was too fast. Faster even than engineered growth mediums on a station. The leaves oriented themselves not to the pale sun but to the direction of the river, as if chasing moisture instead of light. I snapped a sample vial from my belt, scooped 2 of the intact bags and 1 new sprout into it, and sealed it before they could push roots through the vial's base. "Back to the habitat," I ordered. "Now." Tariq did not argue this time. The walk back blurred. Every few steps I checked him. No new coughs, oxygen steady. The vial in my hand felt absurdly small, too fragile for what it held. At the airlock, I triggered decontamination. We stood still while fine particles of neutralizing powder rained down from above, clinging to suits and equipment. Lights pulsed green when the cycle finished. Inside, I marched straight to the med rack and slammed the vial into the main scope cradle. The feed filled my little screen. 1 intact bag, 1 split one sprout caught in mid-rise. Up close, the bag wall looked like a film made from human lung tissue. I recognized the faint branching network on its surface, vessels pressed flat and repurposed. The fibers inside the sprout matched no plant structure I knew, but along the base, where it met the shriveled remnants of the capsule, a ring of cells still held the shape of an alveolus, the tiny air sac at the end of our breathing tree. My own imaging baseline flashed in my mind, those new pockets in Tariq's lung. Behind me, I heard the clatter of someone bumping a chair. Ross, probably. Miguel drawing closer. I kept my eyes on the screen. Vesper had no life yesterday. Today, it did. It had grown from Tariq's cough, from Miguel's sweat, from our bodies. Ross stepped up beside me before I could frame the words. "What am I looking at, Doctor?" On the screen, Tariq's sprout finished straightening, leaves opening in slow confidence. That ring of lung tissue at the base looked like a scar someone had repurposed. "My patient," I answered, "and Vesper's first houseplant." Miguel leaned in on my other side, one hand braced on the bench. "That came out of Tariq?" "He coughed the capsules up," I said. "They only opened when they touched Vesper soil. Not water, not our equipment, just this dirt." "You saying he is infected?" "Infected implies something that was already here. There was nothing here. No microbes, no spores, nothing. We checked every medium. Then Tariq breathes this air and suddenly his lungs can do this." The room went quiet. The fan in the corner pushed out a stream of processed Vesper air and our own exhalations. Ross folded his arms, eyes on the screen. "Talk to me, like I am the person who has to explain this to people who sign contracts. What do we actually know, right now?" I stared at the sprout. It swayed a little in the vial, as if feeling for gravity. "We know the planet does not show any independent life," I said. "We also know that when human tissue leaves our bodies and touches Vesper soil, it changes. Very fast. It uses our cells as a template." I tapped the ring at the base of the sprout. That is lung structure right there. It is not mimicry, it is literally Tariq's tissue rearranged. Miguel let out a slow breath. So the planet is growing a garden out of us. That is one way to put it. Ross watched the screen a moment longer, then turned away. We treat it like any other hazard. We tighten containment, we log everything. We do not leap to mystical conclusions. No panic, no drama. Understood? I could have argued. Instead, I forced the shape of a nod. The next few hours blurred into procedures. I took more blood, more scans, more samples. I repeated Tariq's imaging series and watched those new pockets in his lung deepen and round out like fruit on a branch. I added rules because rules were the only thing that felt firm. We doubled decontamination cycles at the airlock. Anything that could trap dust or droplets stayed near the hatch instead of drifting around our living space. The others grumbled, but they complied. Fear will do that for you. The first sprout in the vial grew a second leaf by night, and a pale root coiled around the glass like a finger. I barely slept. By the third morning, the planet started answering back in scale. I stepped out of the habitat and almost missed the new color. It was subtle, just a faint wash of greenish tone along the ground within a few paces of the base, like someone had dusted the soil with ground-up plant matter. Another step, and the dust under my boot gave a crackle instead of its usual grainy slide. I crouched. Tiny shoots no taller than my thumbnail studded the ground. Each one had a translucent stem and two narrow leaves with veins too fine to see at first glance. The shoots clustered thickest around the spots where we'd stood the longest, or where we'd tossed wash water the day before. Behind me, Miguel climbed down the habitat steps with a crate in his arms. You see it too? I see a lot of somethings, I answered. Came up during the night, he went on. Looked like bare dirt when we turned in. I stepped out before dawn and almost tripped. It is like the ground tried to grow stubble while we were asleep. He nudged the nearest patch with his boot. A few shoots snapped. Clear fluid glistened in the broken tips, then beaded and sank into the soil. I scooped up a small cluster with my scraper and dropped them into a sample tub. Their roots came up easily, very shallow for now. Any of you piss outside the line? I asked. Miguel snorted. You wrote that rule in block letters, remember? No personal runoff on Vesper until Dr. Doom gives the all clear. Good. Then this is coming from what we dropped during normal activity. Sweat, dust, skin. The little things that ride with us no matter how careful we are. Ross joined us, helmet tucked under one arm, eyes sweeping the ground. Report. These are not random seeds, I told him. They are growing where we have been, where we touched the ground where we stood, where we dumped grey water. Wherever we leave traces, Vesper uses them. Lung plants from Tariq, Miguel muttered. Skin grass from the rest of us. The names he tossed off as jokes kept sticking in my notes. Maybe that was how humans handle losing control. We slap labels on what scares us. Ross pointed at the expanding ring of growth. So we burn this back from the habitat and see how it responds. We treat it like any other invasive. We do not know how it stores energy or how it spreads, I warned. If we scorch it, we might feed it. Some systems love fire. We are not living in a green noose, Ross answered. Not while we have fuel. He signaled Miguel, who dumped his crate and fetched a small field burner from the equipment rack. The burner was a simple device. A tank, a nozzle, a steady flame hot enough to sterilize small areas or cut through thin metal. Miguel walked a slow circle around the habitat, spraying a narrow band into the ground. The new shoots blackened and collapsed, leaving a ring of charred soil and ash. We watched. At first, the burned band held. The surviving plants beyond it swayed in the breeze but did not cross. Ross gave me a look that said, "See?" Simple. Within an hour, pale filaments began to lift from the ash like tiny threads. They coiled together, then thickened, sucking something from the burned layer. New shoots emerged along the inside edge of the ring, larger than the original ones, leaves a deeper green. They used your fire as fertilizer, I told Ross. You just fed them a hot meal. He watched the new growth define a sharp, dark line around our home. Then we stop wasting fuel on pretend control. We log the reaction and we move on. More symptoms showed up by afternoon. Miguel cut his finger open on a jagged bolt while adjusting an exterior anchor. It was not a dramatic injury, just a torn flap of skin and a shallow gash across the pad. I cleaned it in the airlock and wrapped it, thinking more about contamination risk than his pain. While I worked, a few drops of his blood had fallen onto a spare panel leaning near the hatch. The panel had dust on it from the work outside. By the time I noticed, the droplets had changed. They were no longer round smears. Each had stretched into a tiny starburst, arms thin and bright, creeping away from the center. The red had faded to a rusty brown. At the tip of each line, a microscopic curl formed like a hook. "Do not touch that," I told Miguel. He froze, hand halfway toward the panel. "You really think I want that under my nails?" I scraped one starburst into a dish and carried it straight to the scope. Under magnification, the lines resolved into small, segmented bodies. They reminded me of glassy centipedes, each no longer than a grain of sand curled in place. The bulk of them still held traces of Miguel's blood cells twisted into new shapes. When I warmed the dish slightly with a thumb on the heating pad, the little bodies woke. They uncurled and began to move. Coordinated crawling, each segment flexing in sequence as they sought the edges of the dish, pressing against the boundary. I flipped the dish over onto a thin layer of Vespa soil. The creatures moved faster, diving into the dust with a kind of blind urgency. They vanished from view, leaving behind fine tunnels. Miguel leaned forward, frowning. "So I bleed, and the planet gets bugs." "Larvae," I said. "Or something very much like them, built from your blood in contact with Vespa dust." We watched the soil surface bulge in one spot where a tunnel ended. A few moments later, a thicker form broke through, a larger version of the tiny things, this one long enough to bridge the width of my little dish. It flexed twice, then burrowed down again. I logged it as another interaction. Tariq, standing in the doorway, breathed carefully as if his lungs might hear us and volunteer more crops. Plants from me, crawlers from him. What do I get as a consolation prize? "You get more scans," I answered. "Everyone does. Now." We spent the rest of the day turning bodies into charts. I imaged lungs, gut, skin, bone marrow, anything my tools could peer into. I took sweat, saliva, hair, every fluid I could get short of drilling into their joints. The anomalies lined up. In Tariq, pocket after pocket of new tissue clung to his airways, ready to form more capsules. In Miguel, thin channels ran alongside his main veins and arteries, a ghost system building on top of his own, presumably to route more blood where Vespa wanted it. In another of the men, Giro, glandular tissue along his back had shifted. Under stimulation, his sweat produced small plates of dense material that flaked off like scales. A few of those plates grew pale fuzz in contact with waste stored in one of our trash containers. By evening, a rough diagram took shape on my workstation. Plants, scavenger mats, burrowing larvae. Everything that had sprouted or crawled or grown around us fit somewhere on that sketch, each tied back to a particular crewman. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. "We are not infected at random," I told Ross later, when we finally sat down across from each other at the table. The others hovered nearby, pretending to busy themselves with food or maintenance. "We are being assigned roles." "Explain." Tariq's lungs produce structures that become fast-growing plants. They orient to water and anchor soil. Miguel's blood builds mobile things that can move nutrients and maybe burrow drainage channels. Giro's skin flakes feed decomposer mats. The rest of us have smaller changes. Glands, membranes, bits that make it easier for these things to take hold. I pushed the sketch toward him. It is construction, an ecosystem built on human scaffolding. He studied the page. "You are telling me the planet is using us as seed stock?" Yes, we step down. We breathe, we sweat, we bleed, and Vesper starts building itself with our parts. It had the recipe in the soil already. It just needed raw material that could be reworked. For what purpose? Ross asked. Why would anyone set this up? That is the wrong question. Purpose is philosophy. I am giving you mechanics. You want purpose, talk to a preacher. I am telling you what it does, not why. He let that pass. What does it mean for us? He asked instead. It means leaving this world might export something we cannot see, I said. We already carry these changes in our bodies. Spores in lungs, larvae in blood, whatever they are building into our tissues. If we take that to another planet or a station, we risk giving Vesper 100 new gardens. This thing did not trigger on the probe, he argued. It had soil, water, heat, no reaction. It only woke up when we stepped down. The probe did not have immune systems, hormones, mucous membranes, all the lovely messy things that make us a walking buffet, I replied. We are compatible. The probe was not. Ross drummed fingers on the table once, twice. We report this. We request immediate pickup and full quarantine in orbit. We keep all material here locked down. We go up and figure out how to cut this out of ourselves before it goes any further. You are missing the point, I told him. This is not a pathogen we can scrape away. It is a process that uses us as part of its design. If we leave before it finishes whatever it is building, it will still be in that unfinished stage. Hungry, aggressive, looking for more hosts. If we let it complete down here. I hesitated, feeling the ground shift under my own argument. We might end up with one infected world instead of many. You want us to stay, he said slowly, on purpose, while our bodies turn into those. He gestured toward the sample shelf, where vials of sprouting tissue and wriggling larvae lined up like an accusation. I want to avoid another wave of colonists landing on a world that will digest them, I answered. And I want to make sure we do not carry this thing off Vesper. Right now, that means strict surface lockdown. No liftoff. Miguel's chair creaked as he leaned back. You are asking us to volunteer as compost. I am saying there may not be a cure, I told him. And even if there is, we do not know how long it will take to find. And every hour we wait gives this thing more time to design itself into us. We need to think in terms of containment first. Survival second. That was the moment the room changed. Before, it had been us versus an unknown environment. Now it was the crew versus the consequences of my logic. Ross stood. Decision stands, he announced. We request pickup. We evacuate to orbit as soon as a window opens and bring the best minds we have to bear on this. I am not abandoning my men on the surface of an experiment. You evacuate, I corrected, and you risk turning every station, every ship, every world we touch into another Vesper. You are not thinking big enough. He looked down at me, eyes flat. My scope is the people presently under my command. Do your job, Doctor. Keep them alive long enough to get off this rock. I will handle the rest. The conversation did not go further. We knew each other too well for theatrics. Afterward, we broke apart to our tasks, each replaying a different version of that brief argument in his head. Outside, the ring of growth thickened. Ross sent the first real emergency report that evening, a compressed burst to the transport in orbit, and then onward to corporate. He did not ask me to review it. I saw enough of the draft to know he focused on the physical events. Unexpected bioreactivity, emergent life from human tissue, potential systemic risk, request for quarantine and immediate medical extraction. He did not mention my reluctance to leave. Fine. That part could stay ours for the moment. Mission time blurred after that. Days, if you can call them that on a new world, slid together. We worked, we scanned, we logged. We tried not to watch our own bodies too closely. The growth ring moved inward and outward at once. Inward, a few stubborn shoots found seams in the habitat foundation and worked pale roots along them, tracing metal edges. Outward, a carpet of low plant forms followed the paths we had walked, as if our footprints had become thick, permanent trails. Inside the habitat, Our filters started failing. At first it was just more frequent maintenance. Miguel cracking open housings, shaking out fine dust that clung to every fold of the filter cloth. Then that dust changed. One afternoon I passed by the open filter unit and froze. The filter rag sagged under a sheet of pale fuzz, thick as an old man's beard. Fine stalks rose off that backing, each bearing a tiny closed capsule at the tip, like seeds waiting for a breeze. "Did you wipe anything from outside on that?" I asked. Miguel, kneeling on the floor with a wrench in one hand, glanced up. "No, that is just from routine pull. We have been drawing in the same air all week." He frowned. "It was clean this morning." I pulled the whole filter out and slid it into a clear bag. A fine dust of capsules shook loose inside, bouncing against the plastic. "That is it," I told him. "We switched to full loop. No more pulling unfiltered Vesper air inside." He opened his mouth to protest. Closing the system meant more heat, more load on the scrubbers, more work. But he shut it again when he saw my expression. "Fine," he muttered. "We live on our own breath. Again." "Then we treat it better this time," I replied. "No shortcuts." When I examined the filter growth under the scope later, the base layer had the same structure as some of Jiro's altered skin tissue. Decomposer mats, grown from his flakes and fed by our own indoor waste. The more I looked, the more it all fit. Plants to anchor soil and secure water, from Tariq. Burrowers to move and churn, from Miguel. Mats to break down dead matter and trap dust, from Jiro. Other men carried smaller tweaks, extra gland loops, modified membranes, subtle changes that made their sweat a better nutrient, their breath a better carrier. The diagram in my workstation gained lines and arrows, the messiness of real biology condensed into a crude table that made my stomach turn. Vesper was not throwing random mutations at us, it was slotting us into a food web. The first open break between Ross and me came a few days later. We had just finished another brutal round of scans. Tariq's new lung pockets had grown large enough that he felt them now, a constant pressure in his chest, like an invisible hand. Ross coughed occasionally too, a dry rasp he claimed was nothing. The transport finally responded. We gathered in the common area to hear the playback. The voice from orbit came through the speaker, flattened by compression. A calm, professional tone delivered cautious sympathy and frontier bravado in equal measure. They acknowledged unexpected bioreactivity, repeated the phrases full quarantine protocol and temporary surface isolation several times, and then, buried in the middle of the message, came the part that mattered. Orbital conditions were unstable. Fuel margins after our landing burn had come in narrower than expected. They could not take off, pick us up and break safely for home with current reserves. They were working on a resupply trajectory. Estimated time to safe extraction. Weeks, possibly a few months. "Months," Miguel repeated, staring at the ceiling. Tariq pressed his hand flat against his chest and breathed carefully, as if each inhale might carry fresh instructions into his lungs. I felt something in my ribcage twist. Ross got to his feet. "Listen," he told us. "We knew this kind of delay was possible before we launched. Fuel math is not a moral failing. They will get here. Our job is to keep the situation contained until they do. No one goes near the shuttle unless cleared. No one licks the plants. We stay alive, and we wait." A few strained laughs broke out around the room, thin but still human. When the others drifted away to chew on that timeline in private, I blocked Ross at the doorway. "We cannot wait months," I told him. "By the time they arrive, this process will be mature in us. We will have seeded half the valley. Anything we have not already given Vesper by then, it will take." "You want what exactly?" He folded his arms, shoulders filling the doorway. "A heroic mass suicide. We step outside and hand our throats to the nearest sprout?" "I want to treat this like an outbreak you cannot clean up later," I answered. "The only safe number of off-world departures while this is active might be 0. His eyes hardened. You do not have the authority to make that call. No, I agreed. I only have the knowledge that feeds it. You have the authority. Use it right. He moved past me without another word. After that, our cooperation turned into something more like a ceasefire. I tightened med protocols again. More aggressive isolation for anyone with new or worsening symptoms, more strict handling of waste, more frequent monitoring of the internal environment. Ross tolerated it because the alternative was chaos. At the same time, he started running quiet checks of the shuttle systems with Miguel, logging fuel balances and structural integrity, like a man picking at the lock on a cell door. We were both preparing for different futures, using the same dwindling resources. The confrontation finally came in the airlock. I caught them there during a late shift. Ross suited up, helmet under his arm, Miguel kneeling by an access panel near the floor, tools spread in a neat semicircle. "You planning a stroll I did not authorize?" I asked. Ross did not flinch. "Internal inspection. We have stress on the anchor lines from the new growth. I want to see how far the roots have pushed." "I already checked that this morning," I told him. "There is no immediate threat to the hull. The real stress is in our bodies, not the cables." Miguel closed the panel slowly and rose, wiping his hands on his thighs. His movements were stiff, like he wanted to be anywhere else. Ross stepped closer. "We have one shuttle. One shot at getting off this planet if orbital support fails. I am not trusting that to a single morning's look at our foundations. I am checking it myself." "You are not just checking the foundation," I answered. "You are running launch simulations. You are testing igniters. You are making sure you can bolt the door and leave the sick behind if you have to." "If I have to choose between saving some or losing all," he replied, "I will not hesitate." "That is your job," I admitted. "Mine is to tell you that taking anyone off this world right now might kill far more than you save." He reached for his helmet. I stepped between him and the inner hatch. "Move, Finley." "No." We stared at each other across the line I had just drawn. Behind him, Miguel shifted his weight. The tools at his feet gleamed in the airlock light. "Doctor," Ross warned, "do not make me go around you." "I am not your subordinate in this," I told him. "My oath is not to your command structure. It is to my patients and to the people who do not know yet that their lives are at stake. Every ship we launched in the last decade is a potential Vesper if we get this wrong." He set the helmet down with more care than the moment deserved. "You are not sabotaging our only exit." "I already did," I answered. Miguel's head snapped up. "What?" "I took the shuttle's med key. The one that unlocks the health interlocks on the launch sequence. The system checks crew status before it lights engines. It will not accept a launch with flagged crew on board unless a physician codes in an override and leaves a recording taking responsibility." I removed our override option. If anyone on the manifest shows advanced symptoms, the shuttle stays grounded. Miguel stared at me as if I had started growing leaves. "I can work around it," Ross growled. "We are not the first crew to have to bypass a lock when time is tight." "You can try," I replied, "but it will take time and focus. And while you are doing that, this thing keeps knitting itself into you." His hand moved before I could brace. He grabbed a fistful of my collar and slammed me back into the bulkhead. My head rattled, a spark from the impact blooming behind my eyes. "I will not let you bury us here," he breathed. Pain flashed down my shoulder, sharp and immediate. Good. It kept me clear. "Better us than half the settled worlds," I answered. He hauled me forward to hit the wall again. Behind him, Miguel took a hurried step toward us. "Ross, stop!" Ross's elbow clipped the helmet resting on the bench. It tipped, rolled, and hit the floor just as the outer airlock indicator flashed from green to amber. External sensors mistaking the swirling dust for a returning crewman. A puff of powder stirred from the floor grate as the outer seal stuttered, letting a gust of dust-laden wind hiss through the narrow seams before the lock re-engaged. The helmet took the brunt of it. The impact jarred the front ring loose. A thin line opened along the edge, just as the passing gust drove a faint cloud of fine particles off the floor and straight into Ross's bare face. He choked, releasing me as instinct took over. Reflex made him inhale to cough. I grabbed his wrist and tried to yank him back, but it was already done. His eyes watered. He doubled over, one hand braced on the wall, body hitching with coughs, as Vesper's finest dust scraped down his throat and into his lungs. Miguel lunged for the manual override and slammed the inner hatch controls, finishing the seal that should have been solid before. Too late. I dragged Ross towards the med rack. The coughs racked him, strong enough to bend his wide frame. He spat a streak of saliva tinged with grey into the waste basin. Then another. For a moment his breathing stuttered and caught, and I thought we might lose him right there. Then he straightened slowly, face gone pale and slick with sweat. "I am fine," he rasped. He was not. On my portable scanner, his lung fields already showed new, denser clusters than Tariq's ever had at this stage. The structures forming in his chest were larger, more reinforced, almost like thick cords laid across a trellis. Vesper had just taken a deep breath of our commander and decided he would be something else entirely. Ross stared at the scan, then at me. "Give it to me straight." "The stuff in your lungs is not just sacs anymore," I told him. "They are building along your ribs too, extra reinforcement. Think ropes laid over beams." "For what?" "I do not know yet." He looked almost relieved at that. Clear ignorance is easier to hold than a partial answer. His breathing stayed rough for the rest of the day. Every so often he stopped mid-task and pressed fingers to his chest, the way a man might press on a bruise. Pride kept him upright when he should have been on a bunk. The planet finished explaining what it wanted from him that night. I woke to a thud against the habitat wall. This was something hitting us, hard. Another came, closer to my bunk. I rolled out and grabbed the nearest thing that could work as a weapon, a pry bar from the tool rack. The others were already up. Miguel crouched by the door with a wrench in his grip, bare feet silent on the metal. Giro stood near the table, eyes wide. Tariq took longer. His lungs no longer loved sudden movement. "You hear that?" Miguel kept his voice just above a breath. "Yes," I answered. "Stay away from the outer wall." Another impact, this one skimming along the side of the habitat. Dust sifted down from a seam overhead. Then a fourth sound. A low tearing, metal against something stronger than it. The noise came from the airlock. We moved as one. Ross was already there, braced in the inner doorway, one hand on the frame. His back looked wrong. In the dim light, hard ridges stood out under his shirt, running from neck to lower spine like a second skeleton laid on top of the first. The muscles along his shoulders bunched in thick knots, cords running diagonally toward his arms. "Do not open that," I told him. He did not even turn his head. His gaze stayed locked on the status panel where the outer hatch indicators blinked quietly between normal states. "They are testing us," he murmured. "Something keeps hitting and then pulling back. It knows this is the weak spot." "Something?" Miguel asked. I elbowed past and slapped the camera feed. The external view from the airlock snapped on. For a moment, all we saw was dust and darkness. Then something moved across the frame. It was fast, a low blur hugging the ground. It circled in towards the habitat, then darted away again. When it hit the side, the whole picture jolted. I froze the feed during one pass and stepped closer. The creature had a long torso and 4 limbs, each ending in a hand-like structure with too many joints. The front pair were heavier, built to strike or pull. The hind pair looked made for pushing off. Its skin had the same tough, ridged texture I had seen forming under Ross's shirt. Along its back, a line of plates rose and fell with each movement. The head was compact, with a short muzzle and a wide jaw. When it hit the habitat wall, that jaw opened. In the frozen frame, a row of sturdy teeth gleamed, suited for gripping rather than cutting. It hit the wall again, then twisted and disappeared out of frame with a powerful push from its back limbs. "That grew out of us," Miguel whispered. Out of several of us, I corrected. I see bone structure that lines up with Ross, maybe muscle as well. The hide matches those scales Jiro has been flaking. Jiro hugged his arms to his chest, as if he could keep his skin to himself by holding it down. We have an apex, I told them quietly. A hunter. The system is almost complete. On the monitor, the creature circled again. This time it did not strike. It settled a short distance away and lowered itself to the ground, almost vanishing against the new growth around the base where plants reached knee height and pale trunks were beginning to thicken. In the far background of the feed, smaller forms scurried. Burrowers, scavengers, Tariq's plants. Every piece we had watched emerge now moved within view at once. The picture finally matched the sketch on my workstation. Doctor. Ross still had not taken his eyes off the camera. If this whole thing is building toward that, what happens when it is done? We stop being useful, I answered. At least as raw material. New arrivals will still trigger copy events at the edges, I think, but it will not need to rewrite every cell the way it does now. You are guessing. Yes. But look at the growth. I pointed at the base of the habitat on the feed. The plants near us are taller, thicker, but they are not pushing in as fast. The new sprouts are further out, at the edge of the ring. It is consolidating. Once this band of things is established, the mechanism quiets down in the center. It is already happening around our base. Miguel frowned. You think what? That once Vesper has a full set of toys, it stops grabbing for more. I think it stops grabbing in the same way, I said. Think of it like wound healing. At first, the body throws everything at the gap, clots, cells, temporary scaffolds. Once the tissue knits, the frantic phase ends. You still get activity, but not the same desperate rush. Another metaphor where we are the wound, Ross muttered. I watched the hunter settle in the new-grown brush. It lay motionless for several breaths, then burst forward and brought down a clump of burrowers in a blur of motion. The system had birth, decay, predation. It had plants, animals in at least 2 roles, decomposers, air layers filling with spores. It had water binding it all. Functionally, it was close enough to a finished picture that any ecologist back home would weep. We were watching it refill a blank page with our bodies. We did not sleep much after that. The next days, 6, maybe 7, I stopped counting, were a slow collapse into a new normal that had nothing normal about it. More predators appeared. At first they came alone, then in pairs. They patrolled the perimeter of the habitat but rarely contacted it, as if the structure itself was not interesting after that first test. Their attention stayed on the growing plane of life below the hill, where burrowers and scavengers moved in a constant, restless layer among Tariq's plants. Our world shrank to the interior, the airlock, and very short trips to the shuttle and back. Our bodies kept changing. Jiro's back ridges thickened until he could not lie flat. Miguel's blood test showed fewer human cells and more of the tiny larvae designs, as if his core self had been demoted to carrier for whatever Vesper wanted to send through its soil. In my own scans, gland tissue along my ribs and under my arms had expanded into unfamiliar shapes, little clusters of dense matter that lit up under my hand scanner. Whatever role Vesper had for me, it was taking its time to form it. Ross grew quieter as the days went on. He still walked the habitat, still checked systems with Miguel, still reviewed sensor data, but his focus drifted. Twice I found him standing at the small port in the airlock, staring out at the predators as they moved in slow, confident arcs around our dome. You are not an observer, I reminded him once. Do not let it draft you into that. He flexed his shoulders, ridges shifting under his shirt. I am trying to understand the thing that is already using my ribcage as scaffolding. Give me that much. We did not talk about the shuttle lockout again. The way he rubbed his chest told me his priorities had shifted. It is harder to plan a clean escape when you are not sure who will be steering your legs by the time the ramp comes up. The message from orbit did not change. They were still working on a solution. They still thought of us as a situation to be solved by more fuel and better treatment protocols. Vesper did not care. The turning point came during a storm. It rolled in from the far hills without much warning. One moment the sky was clear, the next a wall of dust swept toward us, churning the upper air into a brown blur. The habitat shuddered under the gusts. Fine materials scraped along the walls in a constant hiss. Outside, the predators lay low, pressed to the ground, letting the storm pass over them. Inside, we watched the external readings spike. Spore counts in the upper layers climbed. At first, they rose linearly. Then the curve steepened as the storm lifted light capsules from plants and mats and tossed them higher and higher. Thin bands formed in the readout, showing layers of concentrated material hovering over the valley. Miguel tapped the sensor display. "Those are going to spread." "Yes," I answered. "On this planet. That is bad enough." "There is more atmosphere out there," he argued. "They will not all rain back down here. Some will catch upper currents, leave this valley, hit other regions. They might encircle the whole globe." "Which we can live with," I replied. "What we cannot live with is any ship flying through that and leaving." We both looked at the launch trajectory overlay. The shuttle's ascent path pointed right through the densest layer. Every cell in my body agreed with the conclusion I had been fighting toward all along. We could not allow liftoff. Not for us, not for anyone. I found Ross in the med bay, staring at his own latest scan. "You know," I told him, "you were right about one thing." He did not look up. "Only one?" "You were right to think in terms of triage. Save some, lose others." I stepped closer, spreading the storm graph on the next screen. "The question is, who counts as some?" He glanced sideways. "Walk me through it." I tapped the curve. "This is the spore density in the launch corridor. Anything that leaves this world now will plow through a concentrated layer of Vesper's reproductive phase. Filters or not, some will get in. Surfaces will pick them up. You saw what a few grains of dust did to Tariq's lungs. You know what a mouthful did to you. We cannot risk giving this thing a ride off-world while it is still acting like this. We have to think in terms of species, not crew." He watched the rising line. "You are telling me our deaths might be the cleanest line between one infected world and many?" "Yes." "And if we stay, what happens?" "We finish the job for Vesper," I answered. "We let it build itself fully here. The frantic growth slows in mature zones. The system stabilizes. It will still be dangerous but contained. Anyone who comes later will know what they are walking into." "That assumes someone listens to your warnings," he countered. "Then we make it hard to ignore. We turn this whole base into a signal." "You are proposing we sacrifice the crew, the shuttle, and any chance at extraction," he summarized. "We stay. We let it use us. We leave a warning that might or might not be heeded." "I am proposing we keep Vesper's ecosystem on Vesper," I said. "And yes, that means we die here. But you asked me on day one to sign off that this planet was safe. I was wrong. This is the closest I can come to correcting that." "Nothing noble about being mulch," he muttered. "No," I agreed. "But there is something responsible about choosing where you rot." That pulled a laugh out of him, short and rough. "All right," he decided. "We do it on purpose. How?" We spent the next span, an hour, maybe less, laying out the only plan that made sense. Miguel would rig the shuttle's reactor to fail in a way that destroyed its ability to lift, but left enough intact structure to hold a beacon tower and automated sender. We would cannibalize everything we could from the lander: antennas, transmitters, power storage. We would weld those into a dedicated warning rig anchored deep into Vesper's new soil. I would compile every scan, every sample, every piece of data into a compressed package and attach it to a repeating signal. Clear language, clear danger, a quarantine marker no corporate lawyer could plausibly ignore later. We would do it before our bodies failed completely. We did not put that last part in words. Miguel agreed to the plan after one question. "You are sure," he asked quietly, "that this thing cannot be treated? That if we go to orbit, we are not just trading one chance at containment for another?" "If we could keep it on our bodies alone," I answered, "maybe, but it is already in the soil, the air, the water. The storm just painted it over half the sky. You know as well as I do that quarantining a planet is easier than quarantining every spaceport in reach." He looked through the port at the predators pacing in the brush. "All my life, I fix ships," he muttered. "Never thought my best work would be making one stay broken." "It might save more hulls than anything you have ever repaired," I told him. That did it. He grabbed his toolkit and went out. Preparation took a day and a half in mission time. We stripped wiring, pulled panels, rerouted lines. Miguel crawled inside the shuttle's belly and did delicate violence to the reactor housing, setting it up for a controlled failure. Enough heat to wreck the ascent system, not enough to vaporize everything. Every so often he had to rest. The larvae content in his blood left him easily winded now. I watched his hands tremble when he thought no one was looking. Tariq, caught between breathlessness and a strange kind of peace, asked for one favor. "Move my bunk near the outer wall," he requested, "where the growth is thickest. If I am already feeding it, I would rather see what it does." "You do not have to watch this," I told him. "I help design soils for dry world greenhouses," he reminded me. "My whole career is about getting things to grow where they should not. Let me see this one too." We dragged his cot closer to the wall. Within a day, pale roots traced along the outside of that section, and his cough brought up new capsules that grew into stronger, broader-leafed plants than the first wave. He watched them through the thin port with the kind of attention some people reserve for children. "We are not just victims," he murmured once, when he caught me staring. "We are also the authors of this mess." "I would prefer my first co-authored world not kill me," I replied. "You need to raise your standards," he shot back, lips twitching. We never had the big, cathartic talk about what we meant to each other as colleagues thrown together on the frontier. We did not have time. Our comfort came from small things, a shared glance, a half-finished joke, the fact that he kept letting me jab him with scanners without complaint. The plan fell apart during a final setup, because of course it did. Miguel was in the shuttle, halfway through arming the reactor failsafe, when the predators struck again. One of them had been circling closer and closer to the lander over the past days, testing the ground, sniffing around the stabilizer legs. I had watched it on the external feeds and told myself it was curiosity, not intent. Intent arrived in the form of a sudden lunge. The creature slammed into the main leg with enough force to jolt the whole ship. The hull gave a low groan. Inside, Miguel cursed over the comm, his voice cutting as the impact knocked something loose. I sprinted for the door, Ross right behind me. We clipped helmets on as we ran, cycling the airlock on the move. Outside, the storm had left a fine dusting of spores over everything. Every step kicked up a thin veil. The predators moved through it like they owned it. The one attacking the shuttle braced its front limbs against the leg and shoved. Muscles stood out in thick bands along its shoulders and back. Its movements were horribly familiar to me. I had watched Ross's muscles reorganize into those patterns in his latest scans. We reached the base of the ramp. The predator whipped its head toward us, lips pulling back from its teeth. "Do not approach," I told Ross. "You are broadcasting whatever this thing recognizes as kin." He did not listen. He stepped forward, lifting his hands, not in aggression but in the absent way people sometimes gesture to stray dogs. The predator froze. For a handful of heartbeats, they simply regarded each other. Their ribcages rose and fell in the same rhythm, muscles tensing along their spines at the same points. Then the creature lowered its head and backed away from the shuttle. It did not leave. It shifted to one side, settling into a position between us and the main hatch, like a guard dog that had just been given a post. Miguel emerged at the top of the ramp, helmet on, tools clipped to his belt. "Reactor rig is set," he called down. "We just need to trigger it and—" "What in—" His words died as he saw the predator. It turned its head slightly, not fully acknowledging him, then focused back on Ross. "Do not move fast," I told Miguel. "Whatever link it has, it is keyed to him." Ross took another step forward. The creature's tail twitched. Its stance shifted into a ready coil, but not aimed at him. "At least we know what I am for now," he murmured. "Control module." "Apex," I said. "You are the top of the pyramid. It listens to you." He looked back at me, pupils wide behind his visor. "Then use me." "What?" "You wanted a way to keep this thing on the ground," he said. "You have a built-in handler for the nastiest piece of its toolkit. Let me hold them here while you finish the job." The predator huffed once, breath stirring dust. It took a step closer to Ross, then matched his stance. Miguel shifted his weight at the top of the ramp. "If we blow the reactor while that thing is under the hull, it will launch the ship sideways, not straight up." "We are not launching," I reminded him. "We are breaking the ascent system and leaving a crater." "Which I would prefer not to be inside," he replied. Ross kept his eyes on the predator. "Miguel, get back in there and arm the trigger. Finley, help me hold the line." "In your condition," I snapped. "In the condition the planet built me for," he answered. "For once, we use that." There are moments when you realize the order of operations cannot be kind. This was one. We did not have the luxury of a careful debate. I weighed options quickly. If we delayed and retreated, the predators might damage the shuttle beyond use as a beacon frame. If we tried to kill them outright, we risked getting maimed before we could rig the reactor. If we used Ross as bait, anchor, handler, whatever the right word was, we might buy enough time to finish. I hated the choice and made it anyway. "Hold your ground," I told Ross. "Use whatever it gives you." He nodded once. Miguel vanished back into the shuttle. For the next stretch of time, I stood beside Ross while he stared down creatures that were at least half built from him. More predators drifted in from the brush, drawn by some signal I could not hear. They took up positions around the shuttle and habitat, forming a ring, but they did not surge. They paced, they tensed, they watched Ross. Once, when one of them crept too close to me, Ross lifted his hand in a sharp motion. The creature stopped, muscles rippling, then backed away. The movement felt too synchronized to be coincidence. "You see?" he murmured. "Not just teeth, guidance system." "You are still human," I reminded him. "For now." Miguel's voice sounded in my ear. "Trigger is wired. We can set it off from here or from the habitat. Once it goes, nobody stands near that hull." "Then go," Ross ordered. "Both of you. I will keep our pets busy." "You are not dying alone out here," I protested. "That is the point, Doctor." He gave me a thin smile. "They will die with me. Pack and Shepherd, same place. Less for the next arrivals to handle." I wanted to drag him back by force, but he was right. If he left, those creatures might follow us anywhere, into the habitat, into whatever last refuge we tried to hold. If he stayed, their attention stayed on him. He must have read that decision on my face. He stepped sideways, putting himself between the predators and the ramp, then cast one last look at me over his shoulder. "Make the warning loud," he called. I nodded and backed up the ramp, feeling every centimeter of distance as betrayal. By the time the hatch closed, Ross was just a figure in the dust, ringed by moving shapes. The reactor went a short while later. Miguel and I watched from the habitat port. He had wired the trigger into a remote that now sat between us, a small, ordinary device with a single switch. "On your call," he told me. "This should be yours," I answered. "You built the failure." "You are the one who declared the quarantine," he countered. "Close the circle, Doctor." I flipped the cover and thumbed the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a bright core lit under the shuttle's midsection, swelling in a clean sphere. The hull bulged. Panels blew outward in a rain of fragments. A flash of heat washed across the valley, bending Tariq's plants outward and sending a wave of dust rolling away from the blast. The shuttle's nose slammed down into the ground as its supports failed. The main ascent engines tore off their mounts. The whole structure twisted and came to rest at an angle, half buried, like a broken tooth jammed into gum. The predators around Ross vanished in the flare. When my vision cleared, only a few staggered shapes remained near the crater, limping away. One lay still, charred, limbs splayed. There was no sign of Ross. I watched the ruined hull cool, feeling a thin crack open inside my chest. He had been right more often than I wanted to admit. In the days that followed, Vesper surged to fill the wound we had made. New growth exploded around the crater, drawn by heat and the sudden abundance of broken matter. Plants rooted in the shattered metal, their tendrils running through cracks to anchor in the soil beneath. Decomposer mats crept over the scorched patches, turning blackened dust into a softer, darker layer that would be rich with nutrients soon enough. Predators returned too, though fewer this time. They paced the edge of the blast zone, sniffed at their dead, then moved on to patrol the wider ring. Inside the habitat, Tariq's lungs finally failed. It did not happen in a dramatic burst. His breath just grew shallower and harder each day, until he could no longer walk from his bunk to the washroom without stopping twice. The light in his eyes stayed clear, which almost made it worse. "Do not fuss," he told me when I tried to adjust his oxygen mask for the third time in an hour. "Save the theatrics for someone who cannot read his own scans." "I could try an intervention," I offered. "A resection." "You could carve up my chest," he answered, "and spill God knows what into the habitat, and we would both die on the floor. Or you could take me outside and let me finish what the planet started." He held my gaze. "I am not just a victim," he reminded me. "I chose this when I stepped down with you. Let me choose the end too." We argued, but not for long. I knew the limits of my tools. There are lines between treatment and cruelty. Cutting a man open when you cannot plausibly help him belongs on the wrong side. In the end, I did what he asked. Miguel and I rigged a stretcher and carried him out through the airlock. Tariq insisted on no helmet. He wanted to feel Vesper's air one more time without a barrier. We laid him in a shallow hollow near the crater, where the new plants grew thick and tall. Their leaves rustled against each other in a constant soft scrape. He took one long, careful breath. "I always wanted to grow a forest," he murmured. "You did," I told him. "Then it is fine." His eyes closed. His chest rose and fell a few more times. Then it stopped. We watched in silence as the plants around him began to lean in. It was not rapid, nothing like the sprout's birth by the river. This was slower. Leaves rested against his skin. Roots traced the ground under his back. Over the next day, as we checked through the port, his outline softened under a weave of stems and branches. By the third day, his form had vanished under a mound of greenery. The plants there grew taller than the others, with broader leaves and stronger stems, drinking him in. I made a note in the log. Subject Tariq al-Masri contributed final biomass to Vesper's primary anchor stand. It felt obscene to reduce him to that, but I did it anyway. Records matter. It dwindled to just Miguel and me. The ecosystem outside stabilized further. The frantic wave of new sprouts slowed around the habitat and crater, focusing instead on the distant edges of the valley. In our immediate area, the plants deepened. Their branches thickened, their roots intertwined, knitting the soil into a flexible, living mesh. The predators settled into roots. They stalked the outer ring of growth, culling the overabundant burrowers. Once I watched one drag a decomposing carcass toward a mat of fungi-like growth, where tiny scavengers stripped it in hours. It looked like a functioning world now, not an experiment mid-run. My own changes finally came due. It started in my chest. At first it felt like simple tightness. I had been living under stress long enough that I ignored it. Then, one night, I woke with a sharp, tearing pain along my ribs. I gasped and pressed my palm to my sternum. Something hard pushed back. I staggered to the med rack and scanned myself. Where my rib should have been a neat, curved cage, they were now half that and something else. Several had split at the ends and thickened, forming curved pieces of bone that arched inward, meeting at my sternum in overlapping slats. Behind them, in the soft tissue, clusters of dense, seed-like organs had formed, each the size of a small stone. They sat there, orderly, waiting. The glands under my arms and along my sides had merged into a real organ, a thick band of tissue that wrapped around my torso like a belt under the skin. When I breathed, it moved. "Well," I muttered, "there it is." Miguel watched the scan over my shoulder. "What does Vesper want from you?" he asked. "Distribution," I guessed. "Those things look like fruiting bodies, seed cases. The belt is probably responsible for pushing them out when it is time." "So you get to be the tree," he answered. "I get to be the planter," I corrected. "Those seeds are in the right place to get carried if I lie down in the soil and open up. Is that part of the plan now?" "It might have to be," I replied. "We need rapid growth around the tower site to finish the ring. If I can accelerate that with what is inside me, we give Vesper its completion state faster." "Faster for what?" he pressed. "We already blew the shuttle. Nobody is leaving. Why rush?" "Because the longer this stays in the wild phase, the more chance someone out there decides to ignore our warning and come anyway. If they arrive to a mature, stable ecosystem, they at least see what they are walking into. They might even keep their ships in orbit. If they arrive while this is still hungry, they will be rewritten like we were." He closed his eyes. And here I thought my engineering degree would have me worrying about stress fractures, not planetary herd immunity. "It is all stress fractures," I told him. "Just different materials." He snorted a laugh, then sobered. "So what do we do now?" "We finish the beacon," I answered. "Then I go outside and do what Vesper built me for." Miguel did not argue this time. Building the beacon tower out of scavenged parts kept his mind and hands busy. We stripped antennas from the shuttle wreck, rerouted power conduits, and used habitat supports to brace a central mast. The structure rose beside the crater, a narrow, ugly tree of metal and composite, held upright by cables anchored into the new-grown soil. I loaded it with everything I could. Every scan of lungs and glands, every sample image of sprout, mat, crawler, predator, every atmosphere profile, every note on growth speed and triggers. I compressed it into a package and attached a plain language header that any receiver could interpret without needing our decryption keys. The warning itself took me 3 tries. My first draft was too clinical. The second sagged into pleading. The third was simple. "This is Dr. Finley McAllister of the Vesper survey team," I recorded. "The planet-designated Vesper is not lifeless. It uses visiting human biology as seed stock to grow its own ecosystem. Any landing without full containment will result in irreversible bodily transformation and the creation of a new biosphere linked to your cells. Treat Vesper as a permanent quarantine world. No landing, no low-orbit operations. Do not attempt rescue. We are already part of the system. Do not let yourselves join us." I played it back once. My voice sounded tired but clear. That would have to do. Miguel watched me from the doorway. "That is our one shot at theme," he commented. "You happy with it?" "No," I answered, "but it is true." We set the transmitter to loop that message alongside the data. The tower's light blinked red at the top, powered by a sealed isotope generator Miguel had salvaged from auxiliary systems. It would run for years on its own. All that remained was to embed it in the ground it was warning about. "Once you do this," Miguel pointed out, "you cannot come back in." "I know. You sure you do not want me to be the one?" I looked at his latest blood work, at the larvae count eating into his red cells, at the way his hands shook even when he tried to hide it. "You have done enough," I told him. "You are the reason that tower stands. Let me be the reason it does not fall." He nodded slowly. "Then I will stay on the inside and babysit it as long as I can. Make sure it keeps talking." "Deal." We stepped out together one last time. The valley around us had transformed. Where once there had been low dust and scattered stones, Now there was a full, young forest. Trunks the width of my thigh reached up toward the pale sky, their bark smooth and pale, streaked with faint lines that reminded me uncomfortably of tendon. Vines strung themselves between them, forming nets at shoulder height that trembled with each passing breeze. The predators moved through this new terrain with practiced ease, slipping between trunks, claws biting into bark when they needed height. They watched us but did not close in. I led the way to the base of the tower. Miguel helped me clear a shallow depression there, right against one of the main supports. "You sure you want manual?" he asked. "We could try to let this happen on its own." "If I leave it to chance, it might take too long," I replied. "Or it might not target the right place. We need this site dense." "You want any drugs? Something to ease?" He let the rest hang. "No," I answered. "If I numb it, I might not get it right. I need to feel what I'm doing." He grimaced more for me than for himself. "All right, doctor. Time to perform the last surgery." I lay down in the hollow, back against the soft, warm soil. Roots pressed lightly against my shoulder blades, then shifted out of the way as if making room. The tower rose above me, all sharp lines and blinking red. Miguel knelt at my side. "You want me to—" "I will handle the first cut," I told him. "You can widen if I pass out." He winced but nodded. I took the small field scalpel from my belt. Simple tool. Thin blade. I had used it 100 times for everyday procedures, minor incisions, routine biopsies. Never like this. I positioned the tip at the center of my chest, just below the sternum, where the scans had shown the densest cluster of seed organs. "Count of 3, Miguel muttered. "On 1, I corrected because false comfort was pointless. I pressed. Pain lit up in a clean line, bright and immediate. My body tried to twist away from it. I held still. The skin parted more easily than it should have. Under it, the split ribs pushed forward, eager, like fingers opening. I widened the cut, following the line of the bone as it separated. Blood welled, then slowed almost at once. The new tissue under it thickened into a jelly-like layer that stemmed the flow, more like sap than human clotting. Within that layer, the seed organs sat packed in neat rows. Each was an oval, smooth and pale, with faint swirling lines on the surface that matched the patterns I had seen on early sprout capsules. Miguel's hand hovered near the scalpel, ready if I dropped it. "You still with me?" he asked. "Unfortunately," I replied. "Good. Do you want me to help those out?" "Not yet." I took a few shallow breaths, each one tugging at the exposed structures in my chest. The pain narrowed my world to a tight circle. My ribs, my hands, the tower above. Distantly, I was aware of predators watching from the tree line, of plants leaning, of the sky overhead. None of that mattered as much as getting these things into the ground. I scooped out the first cluster of seed organs with both hands and pressed them into the soil beside me. They sank in easily, as if the dirt had been waiting soft and ready, just beneath the surface. Tiny rootlets sprouted from their undersides the instant they touched, wriggling down. I repeated the motion again and again, emptying the belt around my ribs. Each movement cost more, as strength drained out of my limbs and the air struggled to reach the parts of my lungs still functioning. Miguel took over when my fingers began to lose coordination. He dug gently, cupping the organs and planting them in a ring around where my torso lay. "Can you still feel—" "Yes," I cut him off. "I feel plenty." "I was going to ask if you can still feel your legs," he clarified. They were numb from the knees down. That had started before the procedure. Vesper was already unplugging unneeded structures to recycle them. "Not really," I admitted. "Focus on the seeds." We worked until the belt was empty. By then, the first olives of tissue had already begun to change. Their surfaces thickened, splitting along preset lines. Small, pale shoots broke through, curling toward the tower, as if it were a sun. I lay back fully, letting my open chest rest in the soil. The split ribs gripped the edge of the hollow like roots. Miguel adjusted my head so I could see the tower's light between the rising sprouts. "You did it," he murmured. "You will have your ring." "We did it," I corrected. "Do not forget to keep that beacon running. Kick it if you have to." He laughed once, then wiped at his face with the back of his hand. Dust streaked his cheeks. "Any last orders, Doctor?" "One," I managed. "When this starts to grow over me, do not pull it back. Let it anchor. If you try to keep me clear, you might slow the process." He nodded. "Understood." He stayed with me until the sprouts had grown tall enough to brush his knees. I could feel their roots pushing through the soil under my back, winding around my spine, threading between the split ribs, weaving themselves into the spaces my organs had vacated. My vision narrowed. In that tunnel, memories flickered. Tariq grinning through a cough at the riverside, Miguel swearing at a jammed support strut, Ross standing in the airlock with his bare face in the dust. Each image carried weight, but not enough to pull me from what I had chosen. I fixed my gaze on the tower's light. Red. On, off, on, off. Each blink signaled another loop of the warning I had recorded. "Do not land. Do not join us." The plants around me thickened. Stems hardened into trunks. Vines braided themselves over my limbs, pinning me gently but firmly in place. I felt my remaining skin stretch and then dissolve into something that fed them, warmth leaching out of my muscles and into their roots. As the canopy closed overhead, the world dimmed. I could just make out Miguel through a gap, standing a short distance away, one hand on the beacon's support. Predators watched from the tree line but did not come closer. Perhaps, in whatever logic they ran on, this ground was already claimed. The last thing I saw clearly was the tower itself, a thin column of human metal rising from a nest of living tissue grown from my crew. At its top, the light kept blinking, bright against the pale sky, broadcasting our failure, broadcasting our warning. I let that image fix itself in my mind as everything else slid away. My body opened like a seed pod. My ribs turned into slats for trunks to grow between. My arms stretched along the ground as anchors for roots. Vesper took us. The tower kept talking. If anyone ever comes close enough to hear, that is what they will see from orbit. A patch of forest that rose far too quickly around a single, lonely signal. Its metal spine held upright by a ring of trees that started from the shape of a man lying down. A quarantine marker, a grave, and a world finally complete.